members include over 250 congregations of Catholic sisters, a couple of orders of Catholic priests, other organizations, coalitions, and individuals who share our mission. So essentially, we represent and have tens of thousands of people across the country who are involved in this effort. We are also the U.S. member of Talitha Kum, which is the international organization of consecrated life that is working to end human trafficking. So we are connected via various networks to other networks across the globe. So sort of the purpose of my part of the presentation will just be to understand the basics of human trafficking and general trends in the United States, to be able to recognize the indicators of trafficking, and to learn what you can do to prevent or stop human trafficking. And also, if you are someone who has experienced trafficking, either presently or in the past, some ideas for resources for you as well. So to start off with, I'd like to just get a sort of talk about a legal definition of what human trafficking is, and what it isn't. So in 2000, we had the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was first put into place. We're working on reauthorizing that particular act. It has to be reauthorized every few years to be able to get funding for particular services, especially around preventative education and services for survivors. But it was first put into law in 2000, so we are at the 25-year point, and it set the legal standard of trafficking in persons to include individuals who are induced to perform labor or commercial sexual acts through force, fraud, or coercion. So the key word there is or. It does not have to have all three components, force, fraud, and coercion, but just one of those to be considered human trafficking. Things to note: when children are involved in the commercial sex trade, it is always human trafficking. Force, fraud, or coercion does not need to be proven. There's no such thing as a child prostitute. And often we hear things like an underage woman. That's not a thing. An underage woman is a girl, a child. So I think, that particular language is very important in understanding human trafficking. It sort of sets a framework in our mind for what it is, what to look for, and what the legal standard is. It doesn't matter if consent was given initially. Oftentimes, traffickers are very persuasive and, and it is coercive, but they get sort of an initial consent, and then all of a sudden someone is trapped in trafficking, where force, fraud, or coercion are used at a later point. So if that occurs, if initial consent was given, it doesn't matter if later on those three indicators are present, or one of the three indicators are present. Another thing that is incredibly important to remember, that human trafficking does not require movement, and it is not the same as human smuggling. Those are two separate issues, and people do not have to cross borders to be trafficked, which will get important, to understand later when we talk about where human trafficking happens, which is everywhere. Back to the TVPA, it established a framework for the 3 Ps, so protection, prevention, and prosecution. Very important. All aspects are important in the work to end human trafficking. So, to protect people who are particularly vulnerable or have been harmed through human trafficking, to prevent people from being trafficked in the first place. Personally, prevention is really important to me. It's important to our organization that we, prevent people from becoming victims and survivors of human trafficking in the first place. And then prosecution. There's going to be a legal aspect to dealing with this, but as an organization, we are very certain that restorative justice is really the way forward, and that basically means that we work through on both ends of prosecution, the individual who was harmed and the individual who did the harm, to really rehabilitate and do some sort of restoration, especially from the perpetrator to the one who was harmed. Estimates put human trafficking as a $150 billion business worldwide. It is an incredibly lucrative business because, unlike other illegal trades like drugs or weapons, people can be sold more than once. And sometimes people are sold, 10, 12, 15 times a day, maybe more. So you can sell a drug once and it is consumed, but you can sell a person over and over and over. Currently, estimates from the International Labor Organization put around 50 million people being trafficked in the world today. On any given day, that 50 million people are going to be trafficked. Most trafficked people are actually in forced labor, but most of the profits from trafficking come from sexual exploitation. And that is I think when people think about human trafficking, their first thought is sex trafficking. But like I said, there's more labor trafficking in in the world and the United States than there is sex trafficking. But sex trafficking is far more lucrative. So there are a few misconceptions that I wanted to address about human trafficking. Like I said, there are two major subsets of human trafficking. It doesn't just involve the prostitution trade. Trafficking types can include organ trafficking, child marriage, child soldiers, sextortion, and others. Traffickers continue to be creative in how they exploit people, and there are just many different types of labor and sex trafficking across the globe and across our country. Many people believe that all victims are girls, and it is true that girls and women are most often trafficked, but boys and men are a fast-growing demographic among trafficked people. It's very important that we work on protection and prevention in all demographics, because trafficking happens everywhere. A lot of people think, as Lisa alluded to in the beginning, that trafficking doesn't happen where I am. We firmly believe, and there's trafficking statistics are very difficult to nail down, because oftentimes it's always a hugely underreported crime. But trafficking occurs in urban, suburban, and rural communities across the country. It can happen anywhere. And now that, so much of the trafficking, especially around sextortion, happens online, it really is something that can happen anywhere. If you have a device, you have a potential trafficker in your house. And so, putting on protections for those devices is very important, especially if you have children. Another misconception: traffickers only target those who are homeless, poor, or from other countries. Traffickers feed on vulnerability, no matter what it is. It's important to remember that marginalized and BIPOC communities are disproportionately affected, but anyone can be trafficked. Anyone who falls into a vulnerable population, whether it's as a migrant or a foster child, a child in the foster system, anyone can be exploited. And then another misconception is that I am not involved. And I think it's really important for us all to take a personal inventory and understand that whether it's by purchasing goods made via trafficked labor, direct involvement in sex trafficking, or plain indifference to the people who are affected, the majority of people in our country are somehow involved in trafficking and culpable to varying degrees. So we need to sort of take stock of of what we're doing and make changes, whether that means you buy coffee that is through fair trade labor, or chocolate that is fair trade, or you stop using, fast fashion and really look at how things are made in supply chains. Educating yourself about human trafficking. If you're here, that's a great start. So the Alliance really looks at root causes, so systemic causes of human trafficking, because there are so many overlapping, intersecting, uh, weaving systemic issues that really all converge to sort of make a perfect storm of human trafficking. So overall, why does human trafficking happen? People are greedy, the need for power, control, and wealth, low risk and high reward. Um, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very lucrative business model for the criminally inclined. And there's a low risk for being caught because it's so underreported, and it's difficult to prosecute. Um, there's a high demand. So you have someone, you have this demand for prostitution and child victims. Cheaper products, tech and automotive products use a lot of minerals that are mined in mines that use child labor. Pornography is another driver of human trafficking. There's a high demand for a variety of trafficked people and products. Another driver would be unscrupulous companies and recruiters. So people who, go overseas and say, oh, I can bring you to America and you can work here and you'll have this great life and you'll have the American dream. And then they arrive and what was promised didn't occur. And I know the focus, I believe the focus of this webinar is really sex trafficking. So I will focus more on that. But there's an overlap between sex and labor trafficking. If you look at like illicit massage parlors. So those would be those sort of like pop-up strip mall massage parlors that typically only provide services to men, and they're open at very odd hours. So that's just another way people are trafficked and the way that sex and labor trafficking intersect. Root causes of human trafficking would be things like forced migration. So people who are forced to migrate for a variety of different reasons, whether they aren't able to provide for their family where they're at, whether there's been a natural disaster, which is another root cause. We'll talk about that in a moment. People do not leave their homes unless their home is the mouth of a shark. No one wants to have to leave their home. But when you're forced to leave your home, that really ups your level of vulnerability and makes you open to the exploitation of traffickers. Conflict and violence. Again, if you live in a place where you are constantly being bombarded, literally or figuratively, with some sort of violence or intimidation, wars, and you are trying to get your family away from that, again, you're going to have that vulnerability. Poverty, lack of economic opportunity. We talked a little bit about natural disasters. Again, if you are in the middle of a natural disaster and you are desperate, whether that's a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, or it's a natural disaster like, fires going through LA, or mudslides in, a country that is, across the globe. Generally speaking, root causes of human trafficking come from an imbalance of power. Often the difference of power between men and women, but also the difference of power between the haves and have-nots. So people who have money versus people who don't, people who can provide for themselves, people who cannot. Just sort of all of these things come together and again, create that perfect storm of human trafficking. I get asked very often, how can you identify victims of human trafficking? And I did include a QR code there for anyone who wants to get a more complete list of indicators. But identifying a trafficking victim can be very challenging. Um, Probably for the most part because victims are kept isolated to prevent them from getting help. Um, when you are, at the airport or a restaurant or anywhere out in public, you see someone who is being very heavily watched, escorted, or guarded by people who may be traffickers. Um, that can be something to watch for. I know that recently one of our associates, members of the organization, reported a trafficking incident from something he saw at a grocery store where there was an older man with a much younger woman, and he was all over her. And she didn't have freedom of movement, is what we call it. Um, if you see someone in the airport who can't go to the water fountain by themselves, who otherwise you think would be, I mean, sometimes, like if you have a young child, you're going to go with them. But if you have a 14-year-old, they can usually walk, the 10 feet to the water fountain by themselves. Traffickers also coach their victims so that they can respond appropriately if they're ever asked. So it's really important, I think, to really have that sense of intuition, um, that if you feel something is wrong, that you do something about it. So, and we'll talk a little bit later about things that you can do, but generally speaking, I really encourage people to pay attention to that internal voice, that may be saying, something is not right here, and that I should do something. Um, Other ways to identify victims are signs of abuse and control, bruising, tattoo, branding, overly fearful. Another kind of difficulty with identifying victims of human trafficking is that signs or indicators of trafficking are also signs and indicators of other forms of abuse. So it may not always be exactly what you think it is, but it could be another abuse issue. Um, People who are trafficked often, but not always, come from unstable and economically devastated places characterized by oppression, high rates of illiteracy, little social mobility, and few economic opportunities. So when we talk about the forced migration, that's another, potential indicator of human trafficking. So many people ask, why do victims stay? At a certain point, if they have some freedom, if they're going out to do this or they're going out to do that, why don't they escape? I think there's a need to understand sort of the mentality of someone who has been coerced. Oftentimes, especially if they are bringing in money through their trafficking, they sacrifice for their family's benefit. They're taught to be afraid of authorities because of forced criminality and or immigration status. So there's this teaching of trafficked persons who have been forced to do something criminal, whether it's theft or the sex trade, that if you go and talk to the authorities, you're going to go to jail or you're going to be expelled from the country because of your immigration status. So that's another reason that victims say they don't see a better opportunity. They don't see themselves being safe. They feel indebted to their trafficker, or they're controlled, like that sort of that mindset of brainwashing and coercion, that control that is exerted by the trafficker. They don't understand their situation, their legal rights, or how to get help. That is especially true when victims of trafficking are migrants who have had passports taken away, because that's another way that traffickers control. They don't know that they have legal rights. They don't know that as a trafficking victim, they have certain protections afforded to them under the law. Oftentimes, traffickers threaten family and friends, pets, anything they can do to keep control of the trafficked person. Trafficked people are often beaten, starved, drugged, brainwashed. They feel helpless and afraid. And then the last reason that victims stay, because they believe that their trafficker loves them. It might not be the fairy tale love, but it's some love. And they, many times victims are desperate to be loved. And so they feel like this is love. And so they stay. So as we, sort of alluded to a little bit earlier, what can you do? And I have really attached myself to the sort of terrorism tagline: if you see something, say something. And I've applied it to trafficking. We talked earlier about getting that sort of feeling that something is wrong, and listening to that feeling. I can always tell you that I err on the side of reporting something because, on the one hand, you could give someone a bad day if it's not true. On the other hand, if it is true, you've potentially saved a life. And you're not going to know. They're not going to, call you back and say, okay, you did this right or you did that wrong. But I always err on the side of reporting because that belief that someone could be, saved either, bodily harm or years of torment, many things. I think it's so important to report something if you feel like that there's something wrong. So if someone is in imminent danger, obviously you would dial 911. If imminent danger is not present, or you are yourself someone who is experiencing trafficking right now or in the past and need resources or help, I would encourage you to call the Human Trafficking Hotline. That number is 888-373-7888. My program director has a little jingle that she sings with it, and I don't know it, but to help her remember. But it's very easy to look it up online. If you don't have it, you can jot it down right now. Another resource present for you, local task force in your community. There are local social service agencies. I think we're going to hear from a couple of them who do provide services for trafficked persons and can help with that. If a minor child is involved, I especially encourage you to report something if you suspect it, either by dialing 911, calling your local child protective services, or a child abuse hotline. I'm certain that there are services in Indiana, and I think, again, we're going to hear from them, that can help if there is a child involved. Other things you can do. There are apps that you can put on your phone. The first three, Fish, Sweat and Toil, and Boycott, really look at products that we use, and so are more assisting, the ending of labor trafficking. But the final one is an app called Trafficking, and I highly recommend this anytime you travel. If you're staying in a hotel room, this particular app allows you to take pictures of your hotel room, and you take various photos. So you take pictures of the bed and the bathroom and the furniture and the art, the lamps, the chairs. And what that does is it uploads that picture of that particular hotel room, and you give the name of the hotel and the room number, and it puts it into a database, and it's able to sort of cross-reference images of people who are missing, and potentially locate or have a last known location of an individual who's been trafficked, typically sex trafficking victims. Educate yourself and others. Learn ways to identify human trafficking. We talked about the indicators. I gave you access to a link that will take you to a fuller list. Learning ways to protect yourself, your children, your students, your loved ones, people you care about. Prevention is the key to really not having new survivors. And if we dry up that supply of people that are available to be trafficked by protecting ourselves, that's really going to go a long way to ending human trafficking. We go a little bit more into sort of the labor trafficking issues, shopping locally and directly from artisans, buying secondhand, refurbished tech, for example, hold on to items longer, avoid buying online third-party supplier products due to the high risk of exploited labor and unsafe working conditions. And then, we have a number of, on our website, you can sign up for our action alerts for legislation so that you can help advocate for human trafficking legislation to be enacted. This is incredibly important to continue funding services for trafficking victims, things like that. And ways to get involved. There's another QR code if you want to become a member of the Alliance. You can be part of a working group, whether it's education or survivor services or advocacy. Follow us on social media. Keep yourself informed in the latest news. Like I said, educate others in your family, your church, your community. We have a speakers network across the country where you can request a speaker to come and talk to your community. Become a conscious consumer and investor. And then we always ask for prayerful support of the work and engagement in the community. And now I think I am just under my 30 minutes to be able to take questions.
Okay, so I don't see any questions right now. So if anybody has a question, we can fit one in before we move on to Ian. Katie, thank you so much for the reminder about, forced labor and how we all benefit from cheap goods, and that those cheap goods are coming from, usually overseas, and that forced labor is often connected to that. So I think that's a really important reminder for all of us. Okay, if anybody has a question, now's the time. Oh, so somebody asked, can you tell me more about taking pictures with traffic cam, how that will help victims of human trafficking? And
So yeah, I kind of ran through that pretty fast because I was trying to stay on time. So traffic cam, those images of those hotel rooms. So let's say I'm staying at the the Hotel 101, and it's at this particular address, and I'm in room 301. When you take pictures of that particular hotel room, while it's true that most hotels look a lot alike, and especially if it's a chain, it's going to have very similar furnishings, there might be something in that particular hotel room, whether it's a crack in the wall, a missing piece of paint, or a bent lampshade, or some blemish on a piece of art, or some blemish on anything, really. I mean, I think no hotel room is perfect, so it's there's always some little piece that can help identify that particular room. And when it's cross-referenced with images of people who are caught in trafficking, it really it helps provide a potential recent location of a trafficking victim or a last known location of a trafficking victim. It just helps on the path to be able to locate and find trafficking victims. Does that help?
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. So that's
it's a wonderful app. The icon has an E and an I, so it doesn't say traffic cam, but it's free. It almost always knows what hotel you're at already. So it's really important to get those actual room numbers in there, so people can continue to make that location and identification.
Okay. Katie, are you staying on until the end?
I shall.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So we're going to transition over to Ian. And at the very end, if people have other questions that you would like Katie to respond to, we'll create time for that. So we're going to move over to Ian. And Ian, as a reminder, is the Regional Coalition Coordinator for the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. So Ian, I'm going to turn things over to you to kind of take, move on from Katie's presentation down to the state level and even local level.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. Katie, great information. Thank you so much for doing that. I'll start with a little bit about my organization. We are the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. It is part of Indiana Youth Services Association. Prior to my program starting, what IYSA did was run the youth service bureaus throughout the state. In my area, which is north central Indiana, that is Bashor, which the other Katie will talk later. She works there. Crisis Center is over in Gary, and then there's about 30 other ones throughout the state. It's because we had that statewide outreach that the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute approached us about doing an anti-trafficking program right around the time that Indy hosted the Super Bowl because a lot of attention was brought to the subject back then. So we started back in October of 2015. I've been with the program since January of 16. And there's three main things that we do. The first is offer educational opportunities for a variety of audiences. We have trainings tailored specific to law enforcement, um, youth workers, the general public, teachers, healthcare. We recently, just within the past year, became certified trainers for the NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have a wonderful series on digital safety that we are beginning to present to school children, things like that. I'm actually doing one for my son and daughter's school here in the next couple months because that has, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, that has become one of the key areas where trafficking has moved to. Second thing we do is create a statewide network of service providers. So while we get referrals from the Department of Child Services, law enforcement, things like that, we turn those over to our contracted service providers for almost immediate interventions, independent living, short-term, long-term, emergency housing, all different kinds of therapies, things like that. And right now, I believe we have somewhere around 55 contracted service providers throughout our entire state. So even if somebody needs relocation because they're not safe in a certain area, we can usually find them the therapies and interventions that they need to begin receiving treatment. The final thing we do is create coalitions in each of our regions. So, like I said, I work in North Central and Northwest Indiana. So I cover everything from Elkhart County to Illinois, and then from Kosciuszko, Marshall up to Indiana, that whole kind of square. I also work a little bit over by the Fort Wayne area, but just to really cover trainings. In my region specifically, out of Porter, LaPorte, and Lake County, we've created a task force. We've got involvement from prosecutors, law enforcement, and we are in the development of establishing protocols for when that coalition would receive a call or referral from um, a victim themselves or another referral. Um, there are also established coalitions out of Fort Wayne. There are two in southern Indiana. So while we are have been historically focused on trainings, we still do those. We have shifted to focus on building coalitions so that these efforts can be sustainable by the people who have bought into the fact that, yes, it is happening here and something there needs to be continued presence to help eradicate it. Um, like I said, there are multiple coalitions throughout the state that are working in those efforts to make sure that key stakeholders have a place at the table to talk about anti-trafficking initiatives, community awareness and involvement, things like that. Um, in the, what is it now, 11 years, no, 10 years now. that I've worked with the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. We have provided services through our contracted service providers for over 2,000 identified trafficking victims. That is primarily those identified at high risk. So not direct trafficking activity, but like I said, identified at high risk. So absolutely, it is happening right here in our own backyard. Um, Ohio is almost annually in the top five in cases reported and prosecuted because they have a great model of what we're trying to replicate on um, teaching first responders what it is, what it isn't, all that good stuff, and knowing how to identify um, the signs and symptoms, report it, investigate it, and then prosecute it. So we've tried to mirror that and get those results, and I hopefully in all the outings that I have, it seems to be having at least some sort of effect, positive effect. Um, as far as the trends we're seeing in Indiana, we have created a database. So when our contracted service providers are providing services for a referred victim, they input demographics, including age, race, location of trafficking, where the victim's from, amongst other things. We compile that data so that we can have a better understanding and picture of what it looks like. Um, what Katie referred to is absolutely true, that the marginalized populations are at a greater risk to being trafficked than those that are not. So while the population, and I should mention here that our organization provides services for those 24 and under. It's just what our grant will reimburse for the way everything is written. We certainly don't deny any services for anyone 24 and under. We have connections within our network to provide people of that age with services. It's just not something that our grant will reimburse for the service providers. So that data of someone 24 and under will not be included in our database. But when we do look at the data we have, we see that the population of Indiana, of those 24 and under that have been involved in trafficking, um, the marginalized population is at a greater ratio of the standard population of Indiana than other population demographics. So if we look at the standard population of Indiana, we see that about 75% are identify as white, uh, while I believe it is 48% African American, and it was 32% Latinx. If we look then at the ratio and statistics of the marginalized population being trafficked, we see that almost 60% of trafficking victims are Black or African American, and then 41% are Latinx. Um, so while the standard population would show us that they are make up a less percentage. They make up a higher percentage of trafficking victims. That is what we're seeing. The other thing that I mentioned is how trafficking has transformed from an in-person recruiting and crime to an online digital platform. When I first started 10 years ago, I watched a documentary, and they were interviewing a pimp, and he said that he would go to the mall, physically be at the mall, and he would try and flirt with and have conversations with young girls walking by him. And he never went for the ones that um, interacted back with him or communicated with him. He always went for the ones that put their head down, kept on walking because he knew that they most likely had poor body image, low self-esteem, and he could more easily manipulate them into doing what he wanted them to do. Now, that physical presence has shifted to online. We've seen a pretty steep incline in cases that have at least started through various social media platforms. Um, the recruiting can take place online. Kids, teenagers are not very conscious about what they post. So they're putting out their personal information that someone who, through the anonymity of the internet, can take advantage of, pretending to be a peer or something like that. Um, Gain that person's trust, and there begins the grooming process of befriending them, putting ideas in their head that they love them and that parents are bad and they need to do these things for that person. And that can follow through with sextortion, where that victim would send explicit images or videos to that person, creating a scheme of blackmail, where that person may ask for money or additional videos and images, things like that. Um, that unfortunately has become the uptick in what we've seen as far as what human trafficking looks like in now 2026. We have since created a training based around that. It's called Protecting Youth in the Digital Age, where we outline the risks of teens, adolescents using the internet. It's not something where we're telling everybody to, go confiscate your kids' phones or anything like that, but it is awareness around the issue. And we backfilled it with a lot of resources, what to do, what not to do, so that people aren't just scared and cutting the cords, because obviously, as far as schooling goes and things like that, the internet is necessary. So um, those are the primary things that we have focused on. A few of the cases I've worked on, as far as kind of scope of Indiana, they've been a variety. Um, One, especially to Katie's point there about there not being a youth prostitute, that's an Indiana state law. No person under the age of 18 can be arrested for, charged with, detained for prostitution. Um, Case in point, I worked with a 17-year-old male. He was posting pictures of himself online for encounters with other males. No one was being forceful for him to do it. No one was being fraudulent. No one was coercing him. No one was threatening him to do it. He was doing it of his own free will. But because of the nature of his actions and his age, he could have been considered a victim of human trafficking. Um, I've also worked with a minor female victim who was recruited through her residential stay. She became quick friends with a girl that she met in a residential facility. That friend got out before her. Once the victim got out, they reconnected in the outside world. And the friend convinced her to run away from her foster family, go see the friend's victim or the friend's boyfriend in a different city, where she ended up being trafficked. Luckily enough, she was able to get away, make a phone call to her foster mom, who went and picked her up. So um, that recruiting behavior we see, not only on the internet, as I described, but still in real life in residential situations as well. Um, a few other ones that we look at, we see mostly familial or intimate partner trafficking situations through our network, where a son or daughter is being trafficked by their mother or father. Um, or it is a boyfriend and possibly girlfriend who is trafficking that intimate partner. Um, and the point Katie made about the suspicious love, right, is a very real one because they target those that are in vulnerable states. Let's say they're coming from a home where there were limited means, no safe adult. They are witness or part of domestic violence, things like that. And then all of a sudden, this person comes in. Maybe they met online, maybe it's a friend of a friend, something like that. And they offer that person the opportunity to come be safe in a home. They are shown love and attention, taken care of, groomed, bought nice things, and then it is turned on its head, and that person is forced into having sexual encounters for money or something like that, and it's just looked at as status quo. It's normalized by the trafficker, and they believe that it's normal, and that is the way that they either earn money for the family or show love back into the relationship. So that mental manipulation is a key aspect there of what we see as well. Um, how much time do I have left? Okay, we're good. Um, So as we are transitioning from focusing solely on trainings to coalitions, we are actively making sure that, like I said, all key stakeholders have a place at the table so that awareness, just like an event like this, can take place to shed some more light on what it actually looks like instead of, thinking it's movies like Taken or something like that. Um, um, to build and continue to improve the outlook on human trafficking. Um, we are partners with the state police. We are also partners with the Indiana University School of Health at Bloomington. Um, and we work closely with the Department of Child Services, who has a special dedicated team. It's called the Focus Needs Team. That if a report comes through the hotline and any mention of human trafficking takes place, even if that call is screened out, they put a dedicated set of eyes on it to make sure, in fact, that um, there is no threat or that, yes, something was missed and they need to take a second look at it, especially for trafficking. So we work closely with them. As I mentioned, we are partners with the Indiana State Police. They have dedicated human trafficking detectives in both northern and southern Indiana that we work closely with. Um, the FBI of Northern Indiana, that agent is part of our task force out of Northwest Indiana. And we also provide assistance if they're ever doing stings or operations on the back end. So if they get a victim recovered, we have contacted our shelters and our therapists and things like that, so they'd be ready to have a bed or interventions right at the time that they are taken from that trafficking situation. Um, what else? I have a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions before? I'm not sure exactly where I'm at, but I don't want to run over time. I'd like to allow questions.
That's great. If anybody has a question, go ahead and put it in the webinar chat. Um, I'll start with a question, Ian.
Sure.
So if the police or, it's determined that somebody is at risk, Are you saying that somebody who's at risk but not necessarily being trafficked is able to get into a residential, a bed, a safe bed, basically?
Um, mm, that jump may be a stretch. From
Mm,
at risk to residential would
hmm.
probably be too far of intervention of services, but at risk beginning therapeutic services and things like that
Hmm.
would absolutely be something that we could do a referral for. We wouldn't take and Katie from Bashor can also speak to this. We wouldn't necessarily take someone who's just identified it at risk and immediately put them in a residential facility. No.
Okay, great. Uh, okay, so somebody's asking for your contact information, um, and I can certainly send that out. But Ian, do you want to share your email or phone number for the group that's listening right now?
Yeah, sure. I can put it in the chat. Um, email is my best
Okay,
method of contact.
great. So you'll put it in the chat to everyone.
There it is.
Uh, Great, super. And then, one other question here. What's the primary age of individuals being trafficked?
So the data that we've collected, we see females around the age of 14 and males. There's a great disparity there between the amount of females we've had in our database and males. That's not to say that it's not happening to males, as Katie referenced there. It's even more underreported than with females. But with males, we see a little bit younger, around the age of 12.
Okay. Any parts of the state that are particularly vulnerable, or is it everywhere?
It is everywhere. It was probably about a year ago now. We saw a spike around the Logansport area of Latinx labor trafficking of youth in that area, and we had to provide a lot of help, assistance, services for a few cases out of there. Otherwise, of course, around Indianapolis. If you guys ever take a look at the National Human Trafficking Hotline data map, you'll see it. Every major city is a hotbed of calls about human trafficking to the hotline, and that's certainly the case because there's a lot of people there, right? So there's everything happening there, good, bad, indifferent. But we do see it, and that's why Indianapolis would be the major hub, right, of Indiana, just because it's the major city. But we certainly do see it out of Fort Wayne, South Bend. Logansport is a more rural community where we saw a lot of labor trafficking, Evansville. Um, no, I wouldn't say that one portion of Indiana is a necessarily hot spot for human trafficking, but yes, it does happen everywhere.
Okay. Ian, this might be a good moment to end this portion. And we're going to take a short break just to give people a chance to stand up and get what they need before Katie from Bashor starts. So I'm going to just tell people that it is 11:59. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So at 12:04, we're going to turn back over to Katie from Bashor. And Ian, will you stay around to the end as well if anybody has other questions for you?
I will be here. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll see everybody shortly.
Area, um, Northern Indiana for, I've been working in social work for about 14 years now. I have been at Bashor for 10, so my focus is always residential, and sometimes I have a hard time getting out of that mentality, but I will try really hard to bring some of the ideas out to some of you folks that are an outpatient or doing case management and things like that. So I always feel like it does help to have some knowledge there on where we're coming from. I will say our program for survivors, we do oftentimes get youth who are at risk for trafficking, but there's always something else. So it's never just the, hey, this kid's at risk for trafficking or they have vulnerabilities. There's usually other things that come along with them, like histories of self-harm, dysregulated behavior, unsafe behavior in the community, things that are going to escalate them to needing the intensive residential treatment program. Kids who are at risk, but maybe don't have that heightened level of need, are also able to be served through outpatient services. So these are your kids that are clearly at risk, but they also have a lot more going on in their lives, and they're not functioning well in many domains. Like I said, whether that's substance use, self-harm, dysregulated behavior, education issues in terms of like truancy and behavioral things in school. So we do also take kids who are at risk. They come with a lot more than just the risk factor there or the being at high risk. And then again, our program is primarily for survivors of trafficking. So youth who have experienced exploitive sexual interactions and relationships. So that's kind of where I come from. Like I said, we do serve the state of Indiana. We would love to be able to serve other states, but our wait list is generally very long. So until we can serve all of the kids in Indiana, our primary focus is Indiana for this time, for the time being. So hopefully one day we'll get to a place where we can, work with everyone and have all of Indiana's needs met and be able to branch out to other local communities and states as well. So that is my background and where I come from. Like I said, I feel like that's helpful in these presentations so that when I'm talking, you can understand. Like I said, I will try to branch out to some of those other areas as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about treatment modalities. And I am not a researcher. I am just coming to you all as a social worker, just like you all. So this is not going to be your fancy presentation that's going to have lots of statistics and citations and things like that. I am purely speaking from my experiences and what some of the things that we implement within our program to be able to help our youth recover and heal from the traumas they've had and be able to become a successful member of society. So this is not going to be like a research presentation or anything, but I feel like sometimes those are the best presentations when you can just get the facts about what you're working with and what you're looking at here. So that's my goal today, is just to talk to you all, social worker to social worker, clinician to clinician, and hopefully speak your language and help you learn some skills to be able to work with youth in this population. So with treatment modalities, there is no one size fits all for treatment for survivors. There is no magical treatment modality. There is nothing specialized for this population yet. I have faith and hope in the really, really smart, amazing people that do this work alongside of all of us, that they will come up with some brilliant model that is highly specialized for this population. But at this point, there is not anything specific. The most important emphasis in treatment with survivors is the trauma-informed care or trauma-based treatment. Obviously, this type of trauma takes on a whole different form than the things that we're used to working with. So there are some specializations and some modifications that you can make that are incredibly helpful. So with that, the biggest focus when we're working with a youth who has survived a trafficking experience or even at high risk is typically trauma. So we're using modalities based in TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. There is, and I believe we have some folks going to this training, but there is a TFCBT that is specifically for commercial sexual exploitation of children. So there is a branch out there that can help with specialization in terms of meeting these kids' needs and working with them successfully. You're also looking at your treatment models like EMDR, somatic experiencing, which is something I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, and then cognitive processing. So you're really focused and rooted in that trauma treatment, which we got some amazing folks here doing amazing trauma treatment work with people, and that is just the core of what is so important for our survivors. I had listed here also a couple of other things that are really helpful when you're looking at kind of the whole child and working in this capacity. Motivational interviewing techniques and skills are really, really important with this population. Being able to roll with the resistance is incredibly important, and we'll get a little bit more of that in a minute. But motivational interviewing is also a very important skill to have when working with survivors, just because of, as Katie has mentioned and Ian mentioned a little bit too, you have a lot of the fake love, the brainwashing, manipulation, the coercion piece. So being able to present as non-judgmental and open and like I said, really rolling with that resistance is really critical in these cases. And really to engaging the youth and also ensuring that you're, using, a lot of the active listening skills and being able to reframe and understand where they're coming from. So motivational interviewing is a very important skill to have in when working with this population. We also see a high correlation of substance use with our survivors. So being able to either, and again, knowing that not everybody does everything. So referring out for substance abuse treatment, if you're an outpatient, or ensuring that if the youth is in residential or inpatient, that they're able to join into substance abuse treatment of some form, because substance use does typically play a role in their exploitative experiences. And of course, just like we do with all of our other clients, increasing those emotional regulation, grounding skills, affect regulation, is also really important. I know that's also a piece that's wedged into, TFCBT as well. But utilizing our DBT, our CBT, all of the things to really help the kids build the skills to regulate emotionally, is also going to play a role in their treatment process. And like I said, that does tie in with their trauma, and I've got a little bit more with that in a minute, but those are kind of your basic modalities that you're looking at. Like I said, there's no one size fits all. Every client is different. Some respond really well to DBT, some don't. So you switch it up and you try something different. Sometimes you're going to throw everything but the sink at it to find something that sticks, and that's, what we do as social workers is continuing to meet the kids where they're at, and showing that unconditional positive regard is really important as well. So with some kids, some of these basic models may be enough to get you through, or clients, and with others, we got to get creative and try some new things or try more. So that is also a possibility there. Some of the modifications that are things that we can do differently with survivors. Body work is incredibly important. The book, The Body Keeps the Score, is still very applicable in these situations, because our traumatic experiences are stored in the body and the mind. So sometimes when we're doing the cognitive reprocessing that is, with TFCBT, it seems like it might not be enough. And most of it is because these, survivors experience a lot of trauma to their physical body. They are physically violated in many ways, not just psychologically and emotionally. And it is at times, depending on the client that you have and the extent, how intensive and extensive the, exploitation was, you're looking at kids who have sometimes had years worth of sexually exploitive experiences, and the body doesn't forget that easily, just like the mind doesn't. So remembering when we're working with survivors, we are really focusing on calming the central nervous system. We're working on their survival behaviors, because we don't call them survivors for no reason. Like I said, these kids, boys and girls that I've met through the years working in this population, they are truly survivors. Their fight or flight instincts are strong. They read people very well. They have a lot of learned behavior in terms of being able to survive the streets and survive the situations they've been in, to survive the relationships they've had. So really working in terms of the body is incredibly important to help bringing the fight or flight responses down. Typically, with this population, we certainly see that, like I said, that is the fight or flight, freeze, fawn, all of the Fs. They're all very heightened, and it is very evident. So the body work is so incredibly important. Another piece of that is creating safety for these kids. Clients, whether you are in an outpatient office setting, in their home as a case manager or a skills trainer, or in a residential setting like I am, creating safety is so incredibly important, and it is a huge part of the therapeutic relationship and alliance. So ensuring that we're able to help them feel safe, to help them be able to differentiate. For some of these kids, we're differentiating between what is true danger and what are more so non-threatening situations or experiences, because of that heightened survival instinct and survival behaviors there. They are often blurring the lines between what is actual true danger and what is something that you and I may look at and say that's kind of just normal. Like, yeah, we walk down the street and sometimes people look at you and it doesn't mean anything. So there is a lot of work too in terms of safety and helping them to feel safe and regulated. And like I said, sometimes just differentiating between what is true danger, now that you're, out of that relationship or outside of that world, like what does safety actually look like, and what do you need to feel safe? Relaxation techniques and breathing exercises are continue to be important. As I mentioned, we still, even with survivors, we're doing some of our routine things. We've also found that in the body work, grounding and coping through the senses is really important and can be extremely helpful, in, like I said, calming that nervous system, working through a lot of what the body throws at you in terms of sensation and feeling. So we do a lot of yoga. We have a lot of stretching breaks. We have a lot of guided stretches. We have sensory like pathways along the wall where you're going to go to this wall and put your hands on and you're going to push as hard as you can and come back and push as hard as you can. There are different like foot patterns to go through. And it all depends on your client. Some need more of that calming sensation, and others may need more of the burst. So you're looking at things like sports and heavy exercises like weightlifting or push-ups or sprints. It really just depends on what the client is experiencing within their own body. Some, like I said, experience more of the numbing and they don't feel anything, so they need something heavier, something more than yoga and stretches. So really, it's trying to meet them where they're at in that. Their experiences and what their body is telling them. Oftentimes music, white noise machines, guided relaxation apps, all the things to help pull them out of where they're at. Sometimes it is a distraction from what your body's feeling. Guided imagery, visualizations, visual puzzles can also be great techniques. With scent, if you are into it, it's always a personal preference or thing. Some people really utilize essential oils and smell to help in those situations, perfumes or lotions. We do have a lot of clients who appreciate the different scents of lotions, because when you're in those higher stress environments, like let's say we're in a mental health group and we're talking about domestic violence today, and that is a huge trigger for you. Sometimes having that lotion where you can just quickly smell something that is sharp and pungent can be really helpful. That is a smell different from the room around you, can be helpful in bringing you back down to ground. And then we also have, kids, like I said, I'm coming from the kid world. They love their fidgets, any fidgets with texture. They do picky pads where they can get a little movement with their fingers, but it also feels sticky. Body brushing, things like that. So the body work is incredibly important with these youth. Like I said, they have been through some terrible traumas, not just emotionally and psychologically, but physically as well. A couple other areas for modification with this population, or things that you can do on top of this. In vivo or experiential therapies are also really important. Some of the in the moment processing of their re-experiencing of places, situations, people, internet, social media, especially from my lens and my world with residential, they kind of come out of this traumatic situation and then they're put into this little safe haven. The doors are locked. You can't, obviously for their safety and the safety of others. So they may not be a run risk, but the doors are still locked to make sure that nobody can get to them. So you're in this little nest or in this little cocoon of, things are easy, things are safe. I have people with me 24/7 to process if I need anything. I've got all of the coping mechanisms, supplies, skills right at my hands. And when we work with kids to start going back into the community or going back home, they do require some of that help. I would say that like residential sometimes creates a false sense of security, because here sometimes things are really easy. And again, we work with kids all over the state, so we could have a kid from Indianapolis that's here in little Goshen, Indiana, where you don't have the big city vibes. So as soon as they start going back home with their family in Indy, they are finding that they are incredibly triggered because they're back in the big city and you don't have that hustle and bustle here. You don't hear the things, at night when you're trying to sleep. You don't see the people, see the places, the things that remind you. So it is really important to be able to go back with them and step into some of those experiences and support them in transitioning back. We have a lot of youth who will say, like, can I bring my cell phone back and sit down and go through my old, my DMs to delete them with my therapist? I'm afraid to look at my contact list. So with obviously the right permissions and the parents are in agreement too, making sure that like we can support youth in talking about it, because as you're going through that contact list and you're seeing, I feel like I haven't done this in a very long time, but when I go through my contact list, I'm like, oh man, I remember this or I remember that about a person or a situation you were with the person and it happened. All of those memories can come flooding. So the in vivo work is important to help them step back into society, to help them be able to go back to those places, those people, the sounds, and to be able to, in the moment, just look at their therapist and be like, this is so hard. I can't handle this. And to be able to have somebody there to coach you in grounding and to work with you on, increasing your safety plan if that's what's needed. But you can come alongside them and really help in terms of like, here are the things. Some kids don't need that. Others do. So having that as an option can be incredibly helpful. And again, it depends on the client, it depends on the family. But we have had several of our kids that really utilize and lean on those experiential therapies or the in the moment things with their clinician or their team to be able to help support them through. Because like I said, residential is like a little nest, a little cocoon. You're safe here. It feels like you're not really in your real life, and going back to real life can be really scary and challenging for a lot of kids. Another area that we focus on a lot, and this may not necessarily be in therapy, but this may be more for the case managers and the skills trainers or the other people that you're working with. A lot of these kids come with multidisciplinary teams or lots of supports, which is fantastic. So with these young ladies and men, you are looking at trying to help them gain or grow in their independent skills, their independent living, their ability to go out and apply for a job, their ability to have job skills, apprenticeships, things like that are so incredibly important, because a part of them, sometimes like one of the vulnerabilities that is often preyed on is the lack of the things that they're lacking in life, the nails, the hair, the brand new shoes, the clothes. So really working with the kids to be able to get them ready to provide for themselves. If they're like 13, that's a bit much. But if you're older and closer to like 16, 17, 18, it is really important to help them grow in those skills, to be able to care for themselves, to be able to survive in the world. Because again, some of these kids don't have great family supports. So sometimes they're going to a group home to then continue their independence, or they're going into independent living. And they're going to need those skills, because the more that they can be independent and provide for themselves, the less they have to lean back on or rely on others for. And the less likely we are to then reach back out to our old relationships and the old patterns that did meet our needs. So continuing to focus in on independent living skills is incredibly important for this population, um, as well as a focus in healthy relationships and healthy sexuality. Um, like we talked about, the fake love and the um, coercion in those relationships. It really does a number on kids. Um, some of the perceptions that the kids come with of what a relationship is, or what a relationship is like, is incredibly skewed, and it's a little scary to be quite honest. But they have normalized abusive, toxic behaviors in a relationship, and it's really just incredible when they start engaging in some of that treatment work, where you're talking about what a healthy relationship is like, and they're like, that's not it. And then you get to a point where they become more and more open and engaged, and they're like, oh my gosh, that my relationship was not safe, it was not healthy, it was not productive. Like, seeing kids come to that realization is an incredible process, but they do need a lot of work on what is a healthy relationship and what is a unhealthy relationship, and how to look for the signs of love bombing, gaslighting, all the things, narcissistic traits, all of, when is somebody actually taking advantage of you? And it doesn't have to just be in the major ways. It's not them, exploiting you sexually. Like, there are other ways that people can take advantage of you in relationships. So continuing to work on their relationships, and just their mindset around what is a good, positive, healthy relationship is really, really important. And with that relationship piece comes the healthy sexuality. Their view of what is and isn't okay in sexual relationships is, like I said, very skewed. Really depends on the extent of their trafficking, but their perception of their sexual identity, their perception of, what a sexual relationship is to begin with. All of those things are things that they oftentimes need a lot of help with. And some of that is rooted in that vulnerability, that they needed to feel wanted, they needed to feel loved. They believe that sex is love. So a lot of work has to be done in terms of what is healthy sexuality, what are the laws around sex and sexual consent, age of consent, all of those things. A lot of education is needed, and again, like I said, a lot of working on what is healthy and what is normative, because the things that they have been taught or have experienced are highly abusive in those relationships. If you are doing family work, if you're working with kids who have family members that are involved, psychoeducation, psychoeducation, psychoeducation. Parents oftentimes don't understand trafficking. They don't understand commercial sexual exploitation. There is oftentimes a perception that, like, my child was kidnapped. So parents need a lot of education. They need a lot of reinforcement. There comes a lot of stigma with this too, of I'm a bad parent, I'm a bad person, I allowed this to happen. There is a ton of work within the family unit to rebuild, reestablish, and redefine their relationships. But the parents typically need a lot of psychoeducation, depending on, again, no one size fits all. So depending on the family, if they're needing a lot of that psychoeducation work, we may be doing family therapy without client present for a month, maybe a month and a half, to whatever it takes to help that parent to really understand what their child experienced, to help that parent be ready to work on rebuilding their relationship, rebuilding the trust, is incredibly important. we have made all the mistakes and hit all the pitfalls where maybe we started family therapy way too early, and it didn't go well, and we have the major blowups because we didn't slow down to provide enough psychoeducation. So anytime we have a family that we're working with, we definitely focus in very strongly on the psychoeducation. Have we covered all the bases with this parent? Do they understand what comes with safety planning and, preparing them for the run? We always talk with our staff and not only with just us, but also the parents of, we have to prepare for the run. Elopement is a very real and very high risk for this population. And, it comes back to the fake love, the perception of what a relationship is or was. That can pull kids back into that life very quickly. So we do talk about it's not an if they run, it's more so of a when, because elopement is kind of the relapse of the substance abuse world. So you may not be going back to using drugs, but you are going back to a lifestyle. So we really try to view elopement and runaways in that this is a part of the treatment process. And we really have to cover that with parents and help them to understand that these are very high risk situations, and we do everything possible to avoid an elopement or a runaway. But things happen. And, even when we're looking at kids that are doing really well and they're going on home passes and everything is going great, things can go sideways really fast. So like I said, ensuring that parents are very well aware of the risk factors and they're very involved in the safety planning process for their child, is also a very critical piece of that family work. And again, no one size fits all, so each family is different, and will need a lot given what their dynamics are and what they've been through. So there's a lot that can vary there with families. Resources for you guys. These may be some of the things that you can't provide within the office. So these youth come, like I said, they're carrying a lot of baggage. They have a lot of needs. One of the things that I wish we had more of, which is kind of not right to say I wish we had more of, but I do. Survivor mentors are incredibly helpful and beneficial to youth through their treatment process. Obviously, if I want more survivor mentors, there have to be more people that have been victims, but there are areas nationally that have a great network of survivor mentors for people who are coming out of these situations. And that can be so incredibly powerful to have an ally with you that is saying, hey, I've been here, I've done that. This is hard, but you can make it through. To have somebody who has that lived experience can be incredibly powerful, because it is, I'm sure that anybody here who's done social work in any capacity, whether you're a therapist or a skills trainer or anywhere in between, an advocate, one of the most common phrases that I feel like I've heard in my practice over the years is like, you could never understand. You've never been through what I've been through. Survivor mentors are incredibly powerful because they have been through what you've been through. Maybe not that exact thing, but they can relate with you, and they are a great, incredible source of hope and hope for the future for kids, adults. I mean, adults utilize survivor mentors a lot as well. So survivor mentors, if you have that resource, is an incredible resource for youth who are struggling, whether they're in outpatient treatment or residential. The survivor mentor can be a fabulous connection for them moving forward. Another part that we find us doing a lot, and this is more so in the case management role, but if you are like a private practice therapist and you're trying to get your family or clients connected, alternative therapies can also be incredibly beneficial to go alongside of what we're doing in the office. Animal assisted therapy, such as equine assisted therapies, emotional support animals, whether it's a dog or a cat or what have you, can also be incredibly important. Gyms, trainers, studios that are survivor friendly and understand how to have a trauma-informed yoga studio or a trauma-informed gym. Sometimes when we look at saying like, yeah, just go to the gym, it's a great place to exercise and you can do these workout classes. Um, Sometimes we struggle to remember that people who have experienced pretty significant trauma struggle in your everyday situations, walking into the gym locker room and being like, oh my gosh, there's no stalls to change in, and that I've got to change my clothes in front of everybody. So making sure that if we have connections for community gyms, like I said, trainers, studios that can meet the needs of our clients who have significant trauma and may need some modifications or adaptations or understanding when to push and when not to push. Those are also really great resources to connect our clients with. Because again, in that body work, some of it is helping them to establish the routines outside of residential where we say, hey, it's time for you to go to recreation group and you've got highly qualified trauma-informed rec facilitators that are doing your yoga class in a very safe manner for you. Like it is important to be able to find the way to put those skills out into the real world. So like I said, we're up here in Goshen, so we know our places. And then when we're working with kids across the state, we're constantly reaching out to say, all right, what resources are in this community? And, making phone calls to a gym to say, hey, just have some questions to ask. What is your situation there? What's your layout like? What do you offer? Do you have certain equipment? What are your locker rooms like? What are some of your policies that can protect, clients? So sometimes we are reaching out to area businesses and communities close to where the client is to find out if they have a great, hey, this yoga studio it meets all of your expectations or markers, involving sometimes the kids. Is also really important as well to say, what are you looking for? In this, or I also put on here, art and music. What would you be looking for in art? A pottery studio? Okay, great. So it is really about trying to help them find the things outside of the office or the residential treatment center that can continue their pursuit of just being able to um, heal and grow and thrive in their community. I did, not necessarily an alternative therapy, but tattoo removal services are something that we get youth that ask about a lot because, as Katie mentioned in their first presentation, branding is a thing. Some of our kids come and they have tattoos from their traffickers. And when they, work through their treatment and they are with us and they get to a point where they recognize how terrible that relationship was or the things that they've been through and it signifies some of the terrible things that happen to them, we do have kids that ask if we can help them get their tattoos removed. So being able to find tattoo studios or parlors that are willing to help with that, or estheticians, dermatology offices, having connections and helping the kid and or the family to reach out to find those places, that can also be a big part of their healing journey, which is, like I said, tattoo removal and tattoo services are oftentimes not something that we think of as a traditional therapy, but in a way, it is a huge part of their healing process, whether it is getting that tattoo removed or I've seen youth that have covered it up and turned it into something different. They turn it into something beautiful and something that signifies their future, or whatever fits with them. But we have worked hard to have some resources so that kids can be connected to, it's a different form of healing for them, and it's a quite a different signal within their journey of healing. So sometimes the connections that you'll be looking for and making in the world will seem a little off, but they all kind of connect to the greater good for this kid and part of their healing and recovery. Like I mentioned before, independent living skills are really important. Reaching out if they need educational assistance, tutoring, after school type programs. apprenticeships and internships if they are interested in HVAC, welding, um, being a teacher, working to connect them with some of those um, other resources is also important. And again, doesn't look like your typical type of therapy, and talking through, what types of jobs would fit their needs and their lifestyle and where they want to be headed in the future sometimes doesn't feel like your um, average therapy, but it is still a part of their process and their journey. Like I said, independence and creating an ability to care for yourself in all ways, whether it's financial literacy and resources, job skills, everyday daily living skills is incredibly important as something that helps to mitigate risk for these clients. Treatment pitfalls that I want to talk about a little bit here, because they are out there. Trauma bonding, and the coercive nature of their lifestyle and relationships. When youth come to us initially, we often hear I don't know, by often I mean probably 9 times out of 10. That was my boyfriend. He loved me. He cared for me. He never hurt me. Or she, the perception versus reality is not there. Their perception is their reality, and understanding that we are within our own. And sometimes when we see the things that these kids have been through, or like I said, for me in residential, we get packets and packets, and we get all kinds of information on these kids. They've had psychologicals done. They have huge trauma assessments. You read through that, and you can understand the reality of what this kid has been through, but their perception is very different. Like we mentioned, the fake love is real. They have been, for lack of better words, brainwashed into believing that their relationship was good, they were valued, they had their needs met. This is what a healthy relationship is. It's healthy if I can, it's healthy for you to bring money in after you have performed sexual favors for another man. It's healthy for you to bring that money to me, and it's healthy for me to hit you or hurt you if you don't bring me enough, or if you say the wrong things. It's perfectly healthy for me to hurt you. So their perception of their relationship and what their experience was vacillates greatly. Most of our survivors experience a ton of ambivalence. Um, it is oftentimes we find they are very afraid of what the future looks like without their trafficker or boyfriend. And it is really important in these therapeutic relationships that we are non-judgmental. When a young lady comes in and says, "Oh, that was my boyfriend and I loved him," I absolutely cannot look at her and say, "That is not a boyfriend. He was your pimp. He was your trafficker. He was your exploiter." Like, I can't look at her and say that. That damages all the rapport, because she wholeheartedly still believes that this man was her everything. This was true love. So it is really important that we remember that their perception is their reality, especially in the beginning stages of treatment. I said it is pretty amazing to see how that shifts throughout time and throughout treatment. And it typically does, and it will. That comes with a lot of ambivalence. They are very ambivalent about what their life looks like in the future, and how they're going to have their needs met, what's going to make them feel safe, who's going to make them feel important, how are they going to feel important. For some of these kids, the thought of going back to high school is terrifying. Nobody's going to like me, respect me. I was independent. I was doing my own thing. I was making money. Now I have to go be a normal kid that gets an allowance of, $20 a week or whatever, is told what to do by parents. So there is a ton of ambivalence in the changes, and thinking of the future. So being very mindful about that, is incredibly important. The therapeutic relationship is very delicate. Like I said, their perception is their reality. With survivors, we mostly see this with youth who have been exploited for a longer period of time, anywhere between the 6 months to 2, 3, 4 years. There are performance-based behaviors. There are survival-based behaviors. it is not uncommon for that youth to come into your next therapy session and say, yeah, I met my goal, I achieved this, and I did it for you. Aren't you proud of me? This isn't about me. It's not about me as the therapist. You don't do things for me. We have to refocus them back in on themselves. So there will be a drive to perform because they have been conditioned to perform for their exploiter or their trafficker. So really helping with the focus on you are pursuing treatment and achieving treatment goals for yourself. It's not about other people. It's not about me as your therapist. There's nothing you can do or say that's going to make me happy, sad, mad. I will be indifferent no matter what. I am non-judgmental. I am open to you. So making sure that, being mindful that performance-based behaviors are going to be there. Sometimes we look at that and think, hey, that's great. They're engaging. They want to do, they want to do X, Y, and Z to, engage in therapy and do a good job for me in therapy. And it's really more a symptom of their conditioning to perform. So that is something to be mindful of when you're working with this population. Transference and countertransference is also something that we see quite a bit. So making sure you're watching for all of those things. Um, I've mentioned this a couple times with the therapeutic relationship is very delicate. Um, uh, Depending on the youth, like I said, no one size fits all. Nobody responds the same way to things. But some youth question every relationship after a trafficking experience. They don't know how to navigate relationships outside of what that exploitive relationship looked like. So it is incredibly important to be open and non-judgmental with our approaches. When you're working in a multidisciplinary team with these kids, it is very important to be fair and balanced. Oftentimes, these kids will become highly reactive when they see the scales tip towards like, oh, my therapist is siding more with my mom and dad on this than me. So that is incredibly making sure you're staying in that middle ground, your Switzerland, you're, neutral at all times is incredibly important. It truly takes a village for these kids. So there are often times where you're working with multiple providers, support networks, community connections. So it is important that we be open to working with all of the providers because it takes a village to heal this type of trauma. So my last piece of this is just a little bit on self-care because I know we see this in a lot of presentations and trainings, but self-care is really, really important with this population. The work is very intense. These youth often go through cycles of heavy trauma dumping. And let me tell you, that trauma is heavy. It is deep. It is horrific things that have happened to these, our clients, our survivors. It's intense. It's also very easy to go down the rabbit hole. Some of these kids are trafficked by highly extensive networks. So you're finding connections, and it's easy to think, oh, well, this network is connected to this, and it was this street in Indy with this person and this. It is so easy to go down those rabbit holes. In terms of their networks and their connections. So good, consistent clinical supervision is really important. Having your outlets that fuel you and support your mental health and bring you joy. Also, because the outcomes for these cases cannot be predicted. We don't always know how things are going to go. They can and will be unpredictable. These cases take wild turns. Like I said, elopements are devastating, but they happen. You will worry about them. So finding your outlets and finding the things that fuel you are very important because having that balance outside of work so that the heaviness of this therapy and working with these clients doesn't weigh you down. I put some pictures here of the things that I love and the things that fuel me. As an adult, I found a joy in the sport of volleyball. And I feel like now I don't feel right if I go a week without it. And then I love my pup, Hank. So finding those things for you that give you that good balance at work, to be able to leave some of that at work when you go home, is very important, because we can't pour from an empty cup. So taking care of ourselves is critical. Like I said, the work in this with this population is heavy. You hear things that you never dreamed of hearing a person experiencing, let alone a kid. So please make sure you're taking care of yourselves and reaching out for help when you need it and getting assistance when you need it. That is all I really had for you guys. Questions? maybe I'll have answers. Not 100%, not confident there.
Katie, thank you so much. I actually have a question for you
Yeah.
that you presented something that I've never heard before as a clinician, and that is with the flight, fight, or freeze response, you included a response called fawn. And I'm
Yes.
wondering if you could just tell us what that is.
Yeah, I learned about that. If you all haven't heard of Ascent 121, they are an agency in Indianapolis that does some incredible work with survivors of trafficking as well. They host a conference every year called the Build Beyond Conference, and that's where I first learned about the fawn response. And that can be your response that's kind of like your automatic response to people please, to make everything okay. I'm going to fawn over you. Oh, you're the greatest thing in the world. Like, you're kind of like up against the corner. And it's those really charming, charismatic skills that come out to kind of pull you out of a situation. So it's really that ability to flip the script a little bit or to charm the person out of where you're at. It is a very survivalistic thing that a lot of our kids have learned here because they learn that, I can talk my way out of a paper bag, for lack of better words there. But it is that ability to get yourself out of those sticky situations. So you may not fight, you may not freeze, and you may not run, but you may be the person that can stick it out and talk your way out of it or compliment your way out of it, charm your way out of it, those kinds of responses.
Yeah,
Does that
thank
make
you.
sense? Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. Okay, so anybody can ask questions here of actually any three of our speakers. There was a question, I'm just going to go back to it real quick, about resources for case managers that they could use to guide body work. And I guess my question would be, would you even recommend case managers take on that role?
Yeah, I think that, and again, some of this is helpful within the context of a multidisciplinary team, which I do know that oftentimes when a case manager is working, the youth is seeing a therapist. So I think that collaboration is really important. So when the therapist says, "Yeah, we're doing guided imagery exercises," or um, we're doing yoga and doing different stretches. That is a space where the case manager can then say, all right, great. I'm gonna, what pairs with this is I'm gonna link you to this, yoga professional who can help with learning some different skills and techniques. I can connect you with this guided app that's going to be able to give you, that you're going to be able to listen to in your earbuds and help you relax and process. It may be more of that helping to, like I said, connect to the resources, but also then connect to the practice of it. Because we also know you're in therapy, you're there for, 45 minutes to an hour, and there's only so much you can do in the office. Or if you're doing home-based therapy, there's only so long you're there. So you often do rely on the rest of your team in terms of your case managers and your skills trainers that then can help you to do the hands-on work of implementing with the kid. Or family, because sometimes you're coaching the family through this is why, yoga is really important. So, hey, maybe you guys can practice these stretches together. So a lot of it, I think, in the case management role is going to be collaborating with the multidisciplinary team and then helping to connect to the resources and help the kid and family to actually be able to do the things.
Yeah, that's great. Katie, if you can stop your share and then Ian and Katie BG can come on. Um, there was one other question. I'm not seeing any new questions, but please, we've got a few minutes left here. So if anybody has questions, please add them. There was a question about forced labor and what that looks like. And I'm just curious, in domestically, what does forced labor look like?
Well, I think it looks a lot like people who are, it can take many forms. It can be someone who recruits temporary workers to come here. So there's a temporary worker program. Um, it can be malfeasance in that temporary worker program where somebody exploits um, the system itself of getting temporary workers, brings them here, um, they have to provide a certain level of, to be a recruiter, to be able to do any of this stuff, you're supposed to have a certain level of care. So there's got to be a certain wage, a certain housing structure, if if food is involved, things like that. And so for the person who's being trafficked, it looks like not having good housing, not being able to um, get your wages. Sometimes they'll be promised a wage, and that wage will be then garnished for fees like their rental fee for where they live, or if there's water, then they get charged for that utility, and all of that was never stated, and oftentimes they don't have access to their documents, so their passport will be confiscated. If they have that temporary visa, that will be held by the recruiter or whoever's in charge. So oftentimes it looks a lot like labor, like you go and you see people working in fields, or you see people working in factories. It's difficult to be able to sort of identify, what someone who's being trafficked for labor will look like, except that there will be that limited movement of freedom. There's going to be a lot of control on people's lives. They won't have access to their documents. So if something happens and they have to go to the doctor, the person accompanying them will be, all over them, won't want to leave them alone, will be the person who has access to any kind of official document that might be needed to sign in for healthcare. So it's a difficult thing to identify just by looking at a person, unless you're looking at some of the behaviors around the control factor. There might be signs of physical abuse. It really it depends on the trafficker. It's a terrible, I mean, it's all terrible, but we really have to just keep our eyes open, and when we see something, do something about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if Ian or Katie have anything to add.
Oh, you pretty much nailed it. We there was a case in Northwest Indiana, probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. It was a logging company that a bunch of the workers were just having a conversation and realized that no one was being paid what they were guaranteed to be paid. They reported it to their union rep, who reported it to the police. It was investigated, and it found that logging CEO was trafficking them because he was not paying them what he was supposed to, and exploiting their labor and taking the profits. So he was arrested, went to prison. I forget what the sentence was, but yeah, he was convicted of labor trafficking. It's
I would say, having access to a union rep is pretty unusual.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Uh,
Oh.
with the undocumented citizens, you nailed it. They're withholding their passports, or if they're going through the immigration process, they are constantly putting barriers in place so that they can't go to the next step, or they miss a filing deadline that they didn't even file, right? But they're told that a filing deadline was missed, and so they're going to have to continue to work for the next available option, whatever they present, because it's all fabricated, right? Uh,
Mm.
the withholding wages, it's hostile, terrible work environments. Um, yeah, it's bad stuff. I've had the question a few times about what that looks like within a family. Like if it's a family farm, can you exploit your own children, um, your own children's labor on a family business? And yeah, you can, if it comes to the point where they are being harmed in some manner, that they would otherwise, doing the work away from the farm, would be earning an amount of money, and you are not paying them. That can be labor trafficking, and you can labor traffic your own children even. So
I think
Wow.
it's important. So two things on that kind of spurred for me is one, if anybody wants to Google, there was a really interesting case in Georgia called Operation Blooming Onion. I believe that's the name of it. That was a huge, so it was part of the temporary worker program, and it was that they were being exploited by people who worked at the county who sort of administrated all of this. It's a fascinating read, and it might help give a little bit of a framework. The other thing Ian touched on is the idea of being exploited or trafficked by your family. Familial trafficking, whether for sex or labor, is rampant, and I think that's a super important and again, that's where you have all these difficulties with knowing what's appropriate as far as love and affection and understanding how interpersonal relationships work. That first and formative relationship of family is exploited, and people really just they believe that's the system in which that they're supposed to live, and that's the way life is supposed to be. So I just think it's important we have a webinar, I think, dedicated entirely to familial trafficking, but yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much to the three of you. You really, really valuable contributions from all three of you. And everybody has a way of reaching you. So I think that it's, the folks who participated today may very well want to continue the conversation or continue their education as well. So thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for all of our participants, who came, and please do the evaluation and the post test if you see that link there. I know Jan's been putting the links in. And I know that the three of these folks would be happy to answer questions, through email if anybody has any questions. So we're going to close, but thank you so much to the three of you, and everybody else. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.